Again in studio, this time about science, but also about different forms of autism. To understand different forms of the psychology together with autism, it's not easy, but also to build some sort of sensitivity together with different forms of communication with medicine, with also other experts to understand unusual humans, but also how autism did develop in some humans to design a better beauty together with the medicine or Taoism is of course not easy. Sometimes looks like a show, but probably it is associated with different forms of observation. Also, to understand different forms of the disease is not easy, but also to build different forms of advocation to heal and also to support a better elegance for healing. To understand science, it's not easy, especially if it is political. And of course, thinking about autism is completely wrong and actually some sort of disability and disorder. To understand different forms and simple form of elegance together with design and awareness, it's not simple, especially in well-developed, very rich society. To understand existence is not easy, but also different forms of vaccination anywhere in a world. If you are diagnosing different forms of lens, of course, it's not easy to understand that type of development also. If you want to connect the psychology and theory together with the autism, it's very, very difficult. But of course, you might be restricted to build more and more and more if you are actually thinking about autism, but also to build a better forms of the play for some people, to understand simple forms of support for people that are not completely normal. It's also important, but also to build a better climate change for some area of medicine. To understand simple forms of the language is also important. Also, understanding standards, but also different forms together with the domains of development. A lot of people follow their culture, but also different forms of language and become over social. And of course, that is extremely, extremely dangerous if you want to see the neuro simple forms of development. To understand different forms of recession or also influence on some fields in medicine, it's not easy. And also to build a progression together in Taoism, it's extremely, extremely difficult. If you want to build more social skills, like usually very known, or also some people with beauty are building, you must know many, many individuals. And of course, you might have different forms of symptoms also together with your domains or how you are building together with the interactions. To understand different forms of interface is important if you are going to build something more and more and more modern or about the interests about people. But also, autistic people actually display non-verbal behaviors usually, but also expressions completely like also very known people, which is extremely, extremely awesome. To understand different forms, it's not easy, but also pointing together with the healing, together with language. Of course, there are 25 main language you can use to heal yourself or others. In medicine, it's actually very, very different, but also hard to build connections together with different forms of the sectors. It's not easy to understand those difficulty, but also different forms of expressions of different characteristics together with very, very, very simple people. To become more attractive, of course, it's not the main point in medicine, but actually more to understand different forms of the language, but also different form of the concepts. To understand simple forms of the stress is also actually important if you want to heal people that are actually dealing with a lot of stress. Not easy to understand different forms of behaviors or disorders that humans might have. Even smoking disorder, or people do not bath themselves. Yucky! To understand bathing, 2 times or 3 times a day is very important. But if you have any form of partner, of course, it's also important to bath 5 times a day, or 6 times a day, or 8 times a day, or 15 times a day. So you have a bathing disorder. But of course, that means you have more poor body. If your partner is going to actually put you in a bath and clean you, of course that's up to them. But you must know one thing that might be very healthy if you are bathing yourself 15 times a day during any recession or crisis. To understand different forms of being available is also not simple, and you must understand 90% of people are not going to look for very rare areas also because they are not interested in that. The patented forms in medicine are extremely valuable, but also to understand simple forms of less random cure or pills and not very common Taoism in medicine. Actually, that also built some value. To understand different forms of Parkinson disease is also important on a long term if you are thinking to help more and more people. Of course, there is some sort of beauty in medicine or in Taoism, but also to understand the tea. There are millions of type of tea, but also patenting tea might be very good if you are raising some wealth or better design with the image. To understand different forms of the life is very important if you are going to look for the treatment of any forms of human being or any forms of fence also. To understand different forms of microelectrodes is also important so you understand brains better, but also how people are sleeping. Some people are also sleeping when they are working and just talking nonsense. But of course, if you have a lot of sense, you can actually see difficulty in medicine or how some people in beauty are extremely depressed. And there is a huge depression in beauty sector also. Some people are modeling a lot, or they are actually the miss or miss of the world or miss of the city or miss in some area and have extreme beauty. But that beauty can have extreme depression. Depression, it's not easy. And of course, if you are going to think about the Parkinson disease, you should also think about different forms of psychosis to heal that. Not easy to understand everything about the Parkinson. There are different forms of the depressions the beautiful people can have. It's not easy to understand those major beauty depressions. And of course, if people are more known, they can also have different forms of the disorders together with the depression. Not easy to think about that. Of course, people are sleeping a lot, like 8 hours a day in their life. But of course, in Taoism, there was also a question why people sleep. Do humans need sleeping? Of course, there and on that area, also different forms of professionals might have different thoughts about sleeping. Not easy to understand all those type of disorders that happens in medicine, but also to understand different mental disorders if you are actually a psychologist. Not easy to think about if you could actually code yourself to become more beautiful, or just to code yourself not to be more racist, or just to code yourself to become a better model and not to be depressed anymore. If that would be possible, that would be some sort of fiction, but also some sort of science that actually become reality. To understand different forms, simple with the health or the written, it's not easy, but also different forms of the vitamins are actually very important if you are going to look for the more and more advanced therapy for someone. Of course, medications are not perfect and are related with different forms of the cells, but also, if you understand the basic diseases, you can also understand the basic cure. The cures are very important, and of course, there are different forms of the quality in those cures. If you understand simple forms of the cure, you can actually heal more and more people. Of course, calcium is also important, but is some sort of the symbol together with different atomic number 20. It's actually related to the iron and aluminum. The psychology about all the things on this planet is also related with different materials or elements, but also to understand how that come together with the medicine, beauty, but also the beauty of the knowledge or the beauty of the disorders that people might have, but those that understand that could heal.